Mr. Chair, we are now live.
Thank you, Sarah. Good evening and welcome to the Town of Ajax Heritage Advisory Committee meeting for Wednesday, September 8th, 2021. This meeting is being held electronically and live streamed on the internet. All staff and committee members are participating by phone or video. All regular practices and procedures of the committee continue to apply during this electronic meeting. If we encounter any technical difficulties, we may take a brief recess while they're resolved. Thank you for your patience. We will now proceed with the meeting. So first off, we begin with, are there any conflicts of interest from committee members and any of the items that we will be discussing this evening? I don't see any hands going up and I see a bunch of heads nodding no, so I'm going to take that as a no. Thank you. Now, if we can look to adopt the minutes from our previous meeting, which was a little while ago, it was June 2nd, 2021. Do we have a motion to adopt the minutes? Stephen, motions? Can we have a second?
I'd like to move the minutes of June 2nd meeting be accepted as posted, barring any errors or omissions.
Thank you, Stephen. Is there someone who's going to second that? Beverly, thank you. All in favor? Perfect. Motion is carried. And now we will move on to item number 4 on the agenda for tonight. There's several items in there and we will turn it over to Mike. And I'm just going to let Mike go from one to the next instead of constantly interjecting. So over to you, Mike.
All right, thank you. So good evening, everyone. And I've done this enough times. I think I'll trust that everyone can see my slides here. So I'll jump right in. As Anderson mentioned, we do have quite a number of items to go over tonight. It's been quite a busy summer. Some of these projects are new and I think will be quite interesting. Some are items we've had before and are just really in the form of updates in terms of things that have been happening over the last couple months. So the first item I'm going to focus on is a heritage permit for 103 Old Kingston Road, and this relates to a facade masonry restoration. So 103 Old Kingston is on the south side of Kingston Road, right across from the intersection with Windsor, and it also has frontage onto the north side of Kingston Road. It's a building I think we're probably all familiar with, known as the Gordon House. So this building was built in 1881 by John Cuthbert, but it wasn't until 1885 when James Gordon, who the building's named after, actually took over as the proprietor of the hotel in the building. A few years later, in 1893, he actually purchased the building, and this building stayed in ownership of the Gordon's family until 1952. So this building really is the showpiece of the Pickering Village Heritage Conservation District. It's one of only a couple two-story commercial blocks that we have remaining. And really what makes it so important is the ornate detailing and the skilled craftsmanship that went into the brick masonry. I've always looked at this building and had a few questions, and largely that was because it's not the typical symmetrical design that you would expect for a building of its age. And there's a good reason for that. It was actually built as just this section here. So when you look at what was built in 1881, you can see it was actually very symmetrical with the central entrance and then the two bays on either side. It wasn't until a few years later in the 1880s when this eastern wing was actually added. And it was done in a way to complement the additional building, but it really did detract from what would have been a very symmetrical facade at the time. When the building was constructed, it was a little more elaborate and ornate than it is today. So you have this beautiful roof line consisting of a cornice as well as some parapets up on the top. And this over time, I'm assuming, fell into disrepair and was removed at some point in the past. But other than that detail and the porticos that extend from the face of the building, what we're left with today is actually remarkably similar in terms of the original detailing of the brick. When you look at what it looked like early on in the 1900s compared to present day. So unfortunately, as time has moved on, this building has seen a lot of patchwork repairs, as you'll be able to notice when you see the different colors of mortar and that sort of thing between the bricks. But there hasn't been a large-scale restoration project for some time. And by the decay that we're seeing at the top of the building, it appears that water is getting in behind the wall and having some very negative effects on the masonry. So you can see up here that some of these masonry units have started to spall quite badly or even crack in half. And when you look at the upper portion of the building from a different perspective, you can see individual units actually being pushed right out of the facade, likely as a result of the freeze and thaw, as the climate changes year to year. So this really is a building that's in significant need of some work, both from a liability perspective and just, a good maintenance perspective. The only thing that's worse than what's going on at the top is probably what's going on at the bottom. This brick has been decaying over what I assume to be decades now, with quick fixes here and there, but none of which that are really making any improvements. They're either holding the condition steady for a little bit, or in some cases, if they're not done properly, they're actually worsening the condition. So you can see again here that the bricks near the bottom, the entire sort of fired face, the fired clay face of the brick is gone. And once you lose that, you lose any protection that there is for the brick, and it becomes almost like chalk. So over time with the elements, it almost melts away. And you see this quite a bit on buildings that went through a restoration in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, because oftentimes to make these buildings look new again and get rid of some of the patina that had built up over time, they would be sandblasted. And that would make them look lovely and bring out the original colors. But like I said, it would also take off that historic fired face of the clay and then result over time in situations like this. So you can see it right across the bottom. Here you can see some significant efflorescence, which is the white shown on the brick here, which is a very clear indication that water is getting in behind the wall and then pulling out some of the salts and minerals and then staining the outside of the brick. Other locations, bricks are completely gone. So this is in really, really rough shape. And a building like this that has such significant masonry details, those details are actually disappearing, as we speak. So I've been speaking with the owners over the last few years, at least, trying to urge them to take on a project like this. But as you can imagine, this type of project is quite expensive. So it's something that they had to work towards. Another thing that I noticed here was, we're getting to the point where some of these conditions are quite dangerous. So you can see this brick here that's actually falling loose from the arch above the window. And obviously, as a building that has fronts right onto a walkway, these are very dangerous conditions that need to be rectified. So as I mentioned, the owner is willing to move forward with a restoration project, and we're currently in the process of receiving those heritage permit applications as well as grant applications. And the work will be awarded to a local conservation group, a group called Fleming Heritage Resources that operates out of Whitby. And in order to break up the cost of this project, it's going to be broken into two phases. So the first phase, which will occur this year, we'll look at a complete restoration of the masonry at the bottom, as well as the middle of the building. And then what will happen in a later year is the restoration and the full rebuilding, essentially, of that upper level. So anything, I believe, above 32 feet, which encompasses the parapet. And at that time, a historic wooden cornice will also be added. So this group, Fleming out of Whitby, is quite familiar with this type of work. This is a project that they worked on in Port Perry, where, before the project, you can see the photo up here. They had lots of historic evidence as to what the building looked like in the past. and they were able to restore these gable pediments. So we're not quite going to that level of work in terms of the restoration of some of the roofline features with this project. However, they've really proven that they're capable of doing this type of work and have actually been awarded some awards from the local heritage committee in Scugog as well. So I mentioned that the wooden cornice will be reintroduced during phase 2. So that's not the work that will be happening this year. This is the work to happen at a later date. And really what that will be is essentially reproducing the wooden scrolls that would have been, at these sort of colonnade features of the building, and then spanning a wooden cornice across them. So there were certain locations in the past where there was a break in the cornice in order to have a reveal for these gabled pediments. But because these pediments are being restored, the wooden cornice will eventually just run the width of the building. And what that will really do, in addition to providing a very appropriate visual cap to the building, more importantly, it will lead rainwater away from the facade. So rather than landing at the top as it is now and just draining down the face of the facade, it'll leak off or drip from the top drip edge here, and you won't get that damage that we're seeing to the top of the building. So in terms of the work that's happening this year, it will include some emergency parapet repairs, because obviously those bricks that are about to fall loose from the top of the building need to be put back into place and secured until that work can be done permanently. But beyond that, it's essentially rebuilding the bottom 4 feet of the building wall, and then and recreating and matching all of the historic details using the best match brick possible, as well as just doing general repointing of the building throughout its lower and middle half. And repointing is something that has to happen every so often with a building anyway. It's removing the old mortar joints as they decay and just filling those back up so you have the building in a good state of repair. One of the interesting parts of this project, or probably the most interesting, is going to be the use of what's known as traditional tuck pointing, which is a pointing that has a raised white ribbon on it. So a lot of people today, you'll hear the terms repointing and tuck pointing used interchangeably. That's not accurate. Tuck pointing is actually a very specific type of pointing, and I'm going to demonstrate exactly what it is. So this building here is in Toronto, and it was recently restored. So this is 62 to 64 Charles. And as you can tell by the brick facade here, this is a very finely crafted building. You look at the bricks, you see they're all very uniform in design. You would think when standing back and looking at this building that this is made from the highest quality materials available. But when you look more closely, what you see is that is somewhat of an illusion. So when you're looking at the historic brick, which is the area I've highlighted white here, it's very irregular. It's not very fine in terms of its quality and craftsmanship. So, what I'll call a trick that was done in the past to make it appear as a very finely crafted building is to use a mortar that's dyed to match the color of the brick. So this is all mortar here. And then you add this fine white ribbon of along top the mortar joints, and that gives it a very, very precise appearance. So we can see very clearly that this was once done on the Gordon House. We see, all these sort of lingering elements from tuck pointing at some point back in the past. And there aren't a lot of companies that do this work, but luckily Fleming is one. So they've done this work on a number of buildings. I believe this one is from Port Perry as well. And they don't use white putty when they're doing their tuck pointing. They actually tool a raised feature into the mortar joint, and then they color it white. So it's a little different than the authentic tuck pointing and the way it was traditionally done in countries like England. But is their opinion that this is a little more hardy, lasts a little better through the cold weather, and it really does give that same visual appearance. So at this point, I'm really looking to the committee because this is such a this is such a massive job. This is something I did want to bring before the committee. At this point for phase one, there's really nothing beyond general maintenance work being done. So typically, if this was a smaller building and somebody was just repointing it, I would probably provide the staff approval myself and then just provide updates later to the committee. But because this is such a significant project, it is something that I did want to present to the committee, have the opportunity for the committee to ask questions and put a motion forward either in support or not in support of this project. As I always mention, I've put together a sample motion. This is by no means what you have to move forward with. It's just wording that could be used if committee members do think that this project is appropriate. So with that, maybe I'll turn it back over to the chair to open it up for questions or discussion.
Thanks, Mike. Does anyone have any questions for Mike on that? I see a few hands, so we'll go to Jeff first and then Councillor Khan right after.
Yes, my question is with approval, will this speed up their grants to enable the cash to flow to the project?
So the way the grant program works is that the work has to be completed and it has to be paid for by the applicant prior to getting the grant funding. So in this case, because we do have a little bit of money left in the budget, I've been working with the applicants to sort of parse this work up into two separate grant applications. And what we're going to try to do is somewhat phase those. So as one part of the work is finished, we can get that all paid out, and then they can use that towards the second phase. But the heritage permit approval is really just part of the process. It's a necessary step in the process. So it doesn't really have any effect on when we can get the funding out to them.
Okay, over to Councillor Khan.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Been a long time. Hi, Mike. A couple of questions. Who owns this property right now?
So it is owned by a corporation that runs the dentistry office in that building. So they're the proprietors behind Smileline Dentistry, and they have been the owners since the 1980s.
Wonderful. Who is paying for the restoration?
So they are paying for the restoration. It's their project, but the town will be providing some grant funds to provide them some relief in terms of funding a portion of that project.
And how far along have they agreed upon with this project so far?
So the scope of work has been determined. As of right now, I'm just waiting to complete the paperwork for the approvals. All of the work has been laid out in terms of costs, and they've been informed of what they would be eligible to receive in terms of grants. And that's where we stand. Essentially, we need this piece, we need the approval piece before they can begin the project, but they're hoping to begin next week.
Can you give us any indication of costs?
Yes, so I don't have the numbers in front of me, but this first phase of the project is somewhere in the range of I think it's around just over $80,000. So this is a huge project. So phase one's probably going to be around $80,000. Phase two is likely going to be just north of $100,000. So these are significant undertakings. And in terms of grants, typically we have a $15,000 maximum grant. However, if a building faces onto more than one street, the top end of the grant goes up to $30,000. So they were immediately eligible for $30,000. And then because we have some extra funds available this year, I asked them to divide it into two grants, the second of which we could probably get them another $8,000 or so. So what we will be doing is covering very close to 50% of the project cost prior to HST.
And the owners, they're good with that so far, correct?
They are good with that. Yeah. So although this is a massive project, receiving funding to that degree from the town is probably what's enabling this project. I really don't think that they would be moving forward at this point with, a project of this kind without the funding from the town.
Are there any grants available federally or provincially as well that can help them with that?
No, nothing available at the present time.
Okay, thanks for all that information,
You're
Mike.
welcome.
Really appreciate it.
No
Thank you.
problem.
Perfect. Any other questions? If not, does someone want to go ahead and put in the motion for the heritage permit? Sure, go ahead, Jeff. All right, you're on mute, Jeff.
Put forward the motion that we approve the heritage permit application HP 5/21. All in favor?
Is there anyone who seconds?
I'll second.
Sure, Stephen, all in favor? Perfect. Thanks,
All right.
Mike. On to the next one with you as well.
All right, thank you. So I will get that, once we receive all the paperwork, I will have all the approvals drawn up, and I'll present a number of photos as we get through this work. And I suspect that it'll be, this work will begin or commence in the next couple of weeks. If you have the opportunity to have a walk through the village and see some of it being done, I encourage you to do that as well. So the next one's another heritage permit. This one has not been received in its full form yet, but it relates to 109 Old Kingston and exterior painting of the building. So 109 Old Kingston is the courtyard building, which I think we're all familiar with. It is not an authentic heritage building in the district. It's actually built in a style that is not true to what would have historically been in this area. However, this building has been part of the Pickering Village for, coming up on 40 years now, and to a lot of people is a real landmark. So it does somewhat contribute to the village in terms of its character. The work that was originally proposed was essentially painting of the building. So this would be painting all of the panels between the half timbering, their original white color, but also painting the timbers themselves brown. There would be replacement of rotten wood, and then also installation of vinyl capping on the window and door surrounds of one of the units, just as a sort of trial for that unit. Now, this is generally speaking, a maintenance project. However, when I did see the painting of the wooden timbers, I wanted to look into that a little more because as you can see probably from the photo on the screen now, these timbers aren't currently painted. So I wanted to look into historically this style of building, whether or not, it is something that you would see in terms of painted timbers. What I found was, in Europe where these styles of buildings are most pronounced, in most cases where they haven't been painted, efforts are made to keep them from being painted because it really does add to the character of the building. There are a number of authentic heritage buildings, hundreds of years old, where the timbers have been painted, and oftentimes that's because they've reached a state of decay where the paint helps keep them in good working order and in good shape and maintains that integrity of them. But because of the fact that these seem to be in relatively good shape and they haven't been painted, I went back to the applicant and asked if they would be willing to reconsider painting in favor of some other option, because really what they were looking to do is just kind of bring some uniformity to the color of those timbers. Those that are responsible for the building didn't like the fact that there were stains in a number of areas. Some of the areas were very light. So what we somewhat settled on is that the timbers would actually be stained rather than painted, and then the panels between could be painted white. I also asked them to remove the capping of the window and the doors at this stage, at least, from the heritage permit application as well as from the grant application, because introducing vinyl onto a building like this and replacing elements that were traditionally wood isn't something that the Heritage Conservation District plan would really support. So not to say it's something that would be impossible and we wouldn't consider, but at this stage where they really should be focused on the painting and that larger project, I've just asked them to focus on that. So at this point, I'm just waiting to receive that updated application. And as I mentioned, because this isn't an authentic heritage building and because it is, generally speaking, a maintenance type project, there's nothing going on that's really going to change the look of this building. This is a heritage permit approval that can be done at the staff level. Nonetheless, prior to providing that approval, I wanted to, share it with the committee just in case there were any questions or points of discussion. So any questions from the committee?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead, Bruce.
So the other places in that building that's being rebuilt on the west side and that, did they have a heritage permit?
To do some of the structural work that's being done?
Yes.
They didn't have a heritage permit because essentially what they were doing was just replicating what was already there. So, and that came in through by way of the building department. So it was another sort of area of the planning and development team working on that application. But they were aware that this is within a heritage conservation district. So there was some communication there about whether or not a permit would be required.
But isn't this setting precedence that everything that gets done in that building will need a heritage permit and will be able to get a grant?
I wouldn't say it's precedent setting. And one thing I should have made more clear, and I apologize for that, is with the reason that the heritage permit would have been necessary in this case was if they wanted to pursue the painting. And the heritage permit would have been required because they would essentially be altering something from its existing condition. With them going to a staining and just painting areas that have already been painted, if they do agree with that and that's the way the application comes in, then a heritage permit may not even be necessary. We may be able to look at this as just general maintenance and not provide the permit. It's really if they want to hold on to any of that stuff, if they want to move forward with the painting, or if they want to hold on to the capping with vinyl. In those cases, I will have to issue a permit. But like I said, generally speaking, for maintenance projects on non-heritage buildings, that's not something we have to provide a permit for. And that relates back to why they wouldn't have needed a permit to do some of that, the work on the balconies that's happening right now. In terms of the grant, each grant is looked at individually, and there's really not much in the way of precedents that we have to worry about because the grant design is very clear in terms of what types of projects can be approved and provided funding and those types of projects that can't. So it states very clearly that repainting of facades is something, as long as they were historically painted, that is something that can be considered through a grant.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
All right, so we'll move along. So the next item relates to potentially two properties, 2 and 90 Old Kingston, and it relates to potential wall murals on these buildings. So recently the town's become involved with a group called Signs of Life. And Signs of Life is a placemaking and mural project that's really made up of a core team of 2 people. Rebecca Noseworthy, who's an event organizer, cultural planning and marketing strategist, and Chad Tyson, who's a muralist and the creator, owner, and lead artist of a group called The Paint Factory that does essentially commercial murals. So they've been working with municipalities right across Durham region in the hopes of recreating certain areas, mainly urban areas, through the use of these murals. So the town's recreation, culture, and community development team has really been collaborating with Signs of Life over the past little while looking at opportunities to put together one of these murals in the town of Ajax. And at first, the target was to get one of these murals on a town building. Obviously, from the municipality's standpoint, that's the easiest way to engage in an endeavor like this. You're the one that owns the building. You can provide all the approvals required. However, there weren't determined any ideal locations to exist on town facilities. And that was largely because, you look at some of these facilities, places like the ACC, which have these huge walls. And to have what would look like somewhat of a small mural on this massive building wall isn't always appropriate. And also they really want to focus on spots where, as I said, that are a little more urban, where they can help breathe life into these areas. So after looking at different opportunities, it was determined that Pickering Village was really where they should concentrate their efforts. And this was largely due to the village's role as the town's art, culture, and heritage hub. So mural projects really can enhance opportunities for economic development, and they can help attract visitors too. I'm sure everybody's familiar with a mural in one town or another that actually quite adds to the sort of urban fabric of that area. All of the areas that are being considered in Pickering Village fall within the Village Heritage Conservation District. So this presents an issue because our Pickering Village Heritage Conservation District plan actually states very clearly in section 4.6.2D that artistic and commercial murals are not permitted. And I'll get into why in a moment. But if this is something that we want to pursue and something that we do want to consider, then we are going to need for this to be approved by council. Because essentially, as I've mentioned, when heritage permit applications come in and they're very straightforward, they're general maintenance items or items that are sort of quick and easy in terms of not disturbing the heritage fabric of the building, I can issue those at a staff level because they very clearly are supported by the district plan. In this case, it's very clear that the plan does not support this type of work. So that's not something that I would be able to approve. It's not something that the committee would be able to approve. If this is something we want to support, we need to indicate our support to council, and council would have to provide the direction that staff can approve a project like this. So why aren't murals typically approved in heritage conservation districts? Or more specifically, why would our district plan say that we shouldn't support murals and other forms of street art? Really, there's two reasons for that. And first off, I'll say our district plan is pretty much built on a template that's applied to many districts across Ontario. So this policy about not allowing for murals is something you see woven into a number of plans for heritage districts right across the province. And the reason that it's in there is, number one, these districts are generally designated because they have a very, very clear presence in terms of their heritage character. And adding a mural can sometimes detract from that. So if we had a full streetscape of, beautifully preserved, authentic brick buildings, but somebody wanted to paint a mural over top of them, well, that's probably going to take away from the reason that we designated this place to begin with. So the image that I have on the screen here, I think, is very much a representation of that. You have this beautiful sort of classical style building that now adds this level of contemporary art, which actually detracts from the heritage value of the area. The other reason is that painting isn't good for a lot of different heritage materials. So brick is the main one, but you can also look to stone as well as many other materials. particularly with brick, because we have so many brick buildings, painting over brick isn't a good idea. It can prevent that brick from breathing and air moving in and out, and it can trap water in behind. And generally speaking, unless it's done with the right materials, it is going to work against the long-term conservation of that building. So for those reasons, you don't want to open up a heritage district or heritage building to murals without putting a little more advanced thought into it. So with that said, there are plenty of places right across the world where these types of murals are not only supported, but they are actually encouraged as well. So I'm not sure if I've got the pronunciation of this right, but Casco Viejo in Panama is a World Heritage Site. So this is the highest level of heritage designation essentially that you can get. And street art and murals are actually encouraged in this area, as well as a number of other World Heritage Sites, because they are part of the urban fabric and they are part of what gives that area character. Similarly, you see lots of things like this. This example is from Fort Smith, Arkansas. This is a historic district, and if you look closely, you can see that this mural has actually been applied on top of plywood hoarding across the building. So, you know, when I spoke earlier to paint not being good on historic materials, well, here's a case where you're not impacting the materials at all. My guess is that this was an underutilized building or a vacant building, perhaps undergoing restoration. And as a temporary sort of item here, they've tried to add some visual interest to the area. And you see murals like this popping up throughout urban locations right across North America. A little closer to home, this is one that I've always found very interesting, because this isn't really a purpose designed mural. This is an example at the Evergreen Brickworks in Toronto, where the essentially graffiti, this was when it was done illegally as street art. It has actually been incorporated into the heritage designation for this site. So it is actually listed as a heritage attribute. This artwork can't be changed or can't be removed without heritage permits. It's considered to be part of the integrity of this site, and also helps to tell the story of how this site evolved over time. So when we're looking at the village, we really, you know, with the knowledge that we have outright said we don't want to permit these murals, if we do change our opinion on that, we really have to consider two things very closely. One is, will it compromise the general character of the area? And two, is it going to compromise the material integrity of any of the historic sites being featured? And with these in mind, the team behind Signs of Life, as well as staff from the town, sort of narrowed down two locations in the village that were deemed to be appropriate for work like this. And one was 2 Old Kingston Road and one was 90 Old Kingston Road. So just to give you a sense of these two properties, they're both on the north side of Old Kingston. 2 is at a very, very visible location, you know, right near the main intersection of Church and Kingston Road, whereas 90 is tucked away a little bit, almost directly across from the Gordon House that we were just speaking to several minutes ago. So the building at 2 has seen a number of changes over time, but this is the old Dunbar store. And the area that's being considered for a mural is the lower portion here of the east side of the building. And the reason this was considered potentially being appropriate was twofold. Number one, the material has already been impacted. This is a painted surface, and it probably was the painting of this surface that actually led to some of this falling and deterioration down here. But since it's already painted, you're really not doing any more harm to the material by painting it again. Secondly, there's a lot of visibility for this building, and this could be used as an opportunity to create somewhat of a gateway feature into the Heritage Conservation District. So this is just a sort of conceptual rendering of something that could be considered. This isn't an actual design. This was provided by Signs of Life just as, a placeholder to help give people the idea of, what they could actually do with a building wall like this. The second building being considered is 90 Old Kingston, and really it's being considered for the same reasons. There's lots of visibility from the side street, Windsor Drive there, but also this building was historically, this building wall, I should say, was historically not exposed. In the past, there was a building on 94 Old Kingston, which would have been built tight up against this building. So right now you have this blank wall with no real heritage integrity. It's been entirely painted. It's essentially a blank canvas. It's not historic material. Adding a mural onto this site, again, wouldn't do any harm to the heritage fabric. However, it could add a lot of visual interest to a wall that, I think most people would agree doesn't have much interest at all. So again, this is not an actual design. This is just a conceptual rendering of a theme that's being discussed. And that theme is talking about the importance of Duffins Creek to the location of Pickering Village, and the fact that settlement really began in this area because of the salmon available in the creek. And, that unique historical perspective that layers onto the European history that we're all familiar with for Duffins Creek. For a very long time before Europeans arrived, this was a very critical food source for Indigenous peoples in the area. So there was discussion about, using that theme to sort of brand a building within the village. So in terms of where we are with this project, nothing's been decided at this point. It's being presented to council on Monday as an opportunity for council to consider. And council, obviously, before making any decision on this, given that it's in the Heritage Conservation District, they need to look to the Heritage Advisory Committee for advice. So really, we as a committee need to say whether this is the type of project that we would want to support. Their decision doesn't need to be based on our recommendation. So we could say that we don't want council to pursue something like this, and they could decide that they did. They are, at the end of the day, the decision-making body. So their decision, overrules our recommendation. Similarly, it could go the other way. We could say that this is something we do want to support, and council could decide not to support it. So at this point, we're still somewhat in early stages. So this initial report going forward on Monday is really just looking for council buy-in. And there's a lot that's sort of been, that will need to be done if council does buy into this. We need to determine a final location, so one of those two sites. And there are a number of factors that are going to play into that. Obviously, the owner's permission and the owner willing to give approval for these projects is critical to something like this. Funding also needs to happen. Signs of Life is an organization that creates these projects, but they generally don't fund them on their own, so they look to other sources for funding. The final design also weighs very heavily on the artist doing the work. So generally speaking, the artist has a role in determining what is going to be put on the building. Artists can be given themes to work within, but it's going to be their final design that actually is put up on the building. And then beyond that, the town also has its own internal bodies to approve works of public art. So this will be run through the town from that perspective. From our perspective as a committee, before anything gets painted on these walls, if anything is going to be painted on these walls, they'll need a heritage permit. So we will have the opportunity to see the final designs and to provide commentary on those. So at this point, I put together a sample motion. Again, this isn't something the committee has to go with. I think this one, more so than the other items I'm presenting tonight, is deserving of conversation amongst committee members. I imagine there'll be some some very clear thoughts on whether or not people want to support or not support this item. So with that, I'll turn it back to Anderson, and perhaps we can engage in a discussion.
Sure. Thanks, Mike. And I see Councillor Khan's got his hand raised right away, so we'll turn the floor over to him at this point.
Thank you, Chair. I can tell you first off that council will only consider this if we provide guidelines. Like I'm a printer, I'm an artist, and you know the first renditions we saw, like against that brick wall, that didn't appeal to me when I'm thinking heritage. But when Mike, when you put forward the black sign that says "Welcome to the Village," I think it's got a lot more pizzazz and a lot more class to it. I can assure you that council will probably only consider this if we have strict guidelines and we can show us council exactly where the alignments are, how crazy they're going to go, how colorful, if it's going to keep, if it's going to keep the status of what we believe in. And also the second part, I know that will help them to make that decision. The second part would be also, if it's approval, we move forward, we would want as a committee to have a few options. Like when you give the theme to the artist, they will need to show us quite a few designs. That might probably, I don't know, would that stay here, Mike, with us here, or will that go to council as well for approval?
So I'm not sort of the expert on this because this is more of a project of the recreation department, but my understanding is that approval for the final works of art is something that is given at the staff level. There can of course be council input into direction for the art and that sort of thing. But my understanding at this point is that council doesn't necessarily sort of choose what gets approved and what doesn't. I think that question is one that will be well directed to the staff that are available for Monday's GGC meeting, because they really are running this in terms of the process that public art goes through. The only reason that I myself have been brought into this in the Heritage Committee is because of the location that is happening, and because it is a heritage area, so they need to have our involvement. But as I said, I'm not really the force behind this, so I'm hesitant to provide an answer on that because I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, those are just my concerns and 2 cents into it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, no, I'm on chair now. Okay. I had a comment about this. Wouldn't it be a bit up to the people in the district too that have been looking after the area and that what they want? Like, I know that everybody in the district would love to see that corner cleaned up because for 15 years it's been a mess. And you can complain to the town, but that corner is never getting cleaned up. It might be the way to get the corner cleaned up. But what about the people in the district? What do they want?
Yeah, that's a good question, because obviously the people that reside within the district and the people that own businesses there are really the stewards that are helping to maintain the character of these areas. So I think that is a really good question. Unfortunately, the way these approvals work is the town has really been determined to be the approval body, right? So in putting together the Heritage Conservation District plan, there was a lot of involvement from locals in terms of setting the parameters for what should be allowed and what shouldn't be. And that involvement comes forward in the types of policies that are incorporated into the plan. This is a really unique one because, as I mentioned at the outset, this really doesn't fit within the guidelines of what we would typically be considering as part of the district. So it's a unique situation because we don't necessarily know that we'd have buy-in from locals, but there also isn't, the way the mechanism for approvals is set out, it doesn't really provide for that input. But that is something that I could kind of bring forward to the team running this project, is maybe doing a little consultation with people in the area and getting some feedback before choosing a site or before working towards a final design. I think that's a good idea that you raised there, Bruce.
Is there any more questions or comments or anything about this? Yes, Jeff?
Yes, I guess I agree with the idea of the murals, and I like the location, but as far as location goes, did the much benighted Ajax Plaza ever come up in any conversations? It's right across the street from City Hall, and it's a bit of a barnacle, in my opinion. And did that even come in the running for a mural?
It didn't, as far as I know, it did not. And, you know, I could guess as to reasons why. I think there are probably layers to why that hasn't been presented as an option. When you look at that building, there's really not a good opportunity. I mean, most of what's visible is the front sides of these shops. So there's not really the same opportunity. There might be a side wall or a rear wall somewhere that could be an opportunity, but they're also not as flat and sort of like clear canvases, right? And I think once the town got beyond the stage where they looked at their own assets and realized that this wouldn't really work on any town facilities, they went immediately to Pickering Village. And I think they did that for the reason I mentioned at the beginning. Pickering Village really is sort of a creative hub for the town, and it is somewhere where we're looking to bring a lot of innovation sector businesses in, and it is something where some placemaking needs to be done. I mean, I think most people would agree that the district, you know, we've got a lot of dentist offices, we've got a few law offices. Over the past few years, we've seen some new exciting businesses coming in, and this would sort of help build on that and perhaps attract some new tenants and start getting some more restaurants in it and more lively street uses. So, you know, in a very long-winded answer that I'm not even sure entirely why the plaza wasn't considered, I think everybody's really had their sights focused on Pickering Village because it seems like an appropriate place.
Is there any other questions or that?
Yeah.
I can't see half the people, unfortunately.
I have one. It's Beverly talking.
Thanks, Beverly. Go
Hi,
ahead.
I just want to, what we're proposing here with covering up the brickwork and everything else on all of those, does that not contradict what they're trying to do on the Gordon House? If we do something like this with those two sides on the buildings, like the what is it, the jail block or whatever, but 2 and 90, what's stopping from Gordon House and saying, well, to hell with it all, we'll just slap on other bricks and paint over it and make murals. And then we've got all sorts of things going all over the village.
So,
you know, this is a unique area. Let's keep it that way.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And I think one of the important things to remember is because we have this district designation, anybody who wants to put a mural up would have to come through the committee. They'd have to apply for a heritage permit. So right off the bat, I could say we would never support a mural on the Gordon House because we have this historic fabric that, okay, maybe it isn't in good condition, but it's original fabric that is ornate and does add to the character of the village. Those are the features and the attributes of buildings that we want to support because they are what defines the village. I don't know if anyone would look at, you know, the bottom half of the sidewall on 2 Old Kingston Road or 90 Old Kingston and say that those were, you know, contributing to the historic fabric of the neighborhood. I mean, that wall right there is a parged building wall that's just been painted beige. There's no historic fabric at all there. This is all sort of concrete block, and this is just, as I mentioned, like a parged surface. So I think if those two things came at us separately, you know, one is putting a mural on a surface like this, one is putting a mural on a historic materials. Putting it on historic materials is something I'm confident in saying we would never support. Now, if we also need to remember our position as, my position as staff, and then your position as as the Heritage Advisory Committee, what we are always doing is providing recommendations. So there could be a case, theoretically, and I don't think this would ever happen, but there could be a case long down the road where the owners of the Gordon block say, we want to put a mural on the front of our building. We say no, because it doesn't align with the principles of the district plan. But council could overrule that if they really wanted to see, you know, this area go the way of a very artsy area and attract local artists and do new things. Like I said, I don't think that would ever happen because it's very rare that a council would entirely ignore the recommendations of a committee of council. I think they look to us for our expertise. And, you know, with that said, we know that buildings like the Gordon House, the Dale Block, even the front facade of this building, 90 Old Kingston, that's what really creates that heritage character of the district. And if we're not preserving those faces of those buildings, then what are we preserving? This effort is really a way to take advantage of some underutilized spaces that aren't contributing to the character of the area.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And thank you, Beverly. That was a great point, Beverly. Anybody else have anything to say on this matter?
Just me, Bruce, Councillor Khan.
Thank
you. I just have a question / comment. You mentioned, Bruce, about an area that's not being addressed by the town. Can I help take that information over to staff and have them address it, whatever area it was?
If you look at the wall on 2 Kingston Road, if you look at the fire hydrant there, grass has not been cut in months. And then you go to the right, the town property there, those trees haven't been trimmed. It's full of garbage. It's just a total.
Is there any way I can get an email or something that I can forward to staff? Like when you get a chance? So I can really look into it and have it done? Or send it to your councillors for Ward 1?
Who's my councillor?
That would be Marilyn Crawford and Rob Tyler Moran.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. I just want to make sure that, you know, we get our jobs done properly, right?
It's just, I'm looking at that wall and I'm looking at all the vents sticking out of the wall. It's a fireplace door. Like, if you put a mural on it, are they going to be allowed to have their vents? And would the plaque on the left, would the heritage plaque, would that stay in the building, or would it go to the front, or would it be part of the mural?
So the heritage plaque would stay where it is, and it would sit on top essentially of the mural. In terms of the vents, they tend to get incorporated into the mural, so they tend to be painted over. Now, all of that, of course, would have to be agreed upon with the owner of the building. So with murals, when you're not doing it on a publicly owned building, obviously a lot of what's done is going to come down to what the owner is willing to have done. It's my understanding at this point that both the tenant and the owner of that building are supportive of this project. So, you know, but those details are something that would have to be worked out for sure. And that's why I say this is very early stages for this project, and a lot of those details still need to be worked through.
Okay, thank you.
One more question, please. What's better, or I don't know whether you want to go as far as money and stuff, but is it not worth considering putting this back to the way it was instead of covering it all up?
That could be a consideration, but again, it comes down to the property owner and doing the work that would be required to essentially restore this building wall is far more expensive than putting on a coat of paint. And it's something that would have to be funded largely by the owner of this building. Through the grants, you're right, the town could provide funding. But with this with this mural, the owner actually isn't on the hook for any of it. And that's probably why they were, you know, willing to jump on board so quickly, is it makes their building look better, yet they're not charged for it. So in an ideal world, I would agree entirely that the best thing to do here is to entirely restore it. But we don't have the power to force that upon the building owners. That's something that they would voluntarily need to come forward in the same way that the owners of the Gordon House did. And from their perspective, I think they're seeing the mural as a better option.
Okay, is there somebody that wants to put forth this? Oh, sorry, is there any other questions or comments? Does somebody want to put forth this motion? Okay, go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, I would like to move that the HAC supports the installation of mural in the Pickering Village. HCD subject to having an opportunity to comment on the final design.
Is there a seconder? Thank you, Jeff. All in favor? Hang on. Counselor, okay, 1, 2, 3. So is that, do we have a ruling on that? Is that, did it pass? I can't count them, my screen won't let me.
Mr. Chair, which way did you vote?
I'm not voting for it.
Okay, so you have, it looks like 5, 4, and 3 that have abstained.
And what does that make it?
Well, the motion would carry with the
Okay,
majority.
the motion's carried. Okay, Mike, are you ready for your next one?
I am. And from this point, they get a little quicker. So we're getting more into the updates. Some of these do involve motions, but they're quite straightforward. And in many cases like this one, it's actually a recap of an item that we visited, previously, I believe, either in 2020 or more recently than that. So the next item is the Cultural Heritage Evaluation Report for 1641 Church Street North. This is a property very close to, I guess, getting close to Taunton. It's just south of the cemetery at the corner of Taunton and Church Street. It's a large rural property that consists of a farmhouse and a few other farm type buildings. So this property has been slated for redevelopment, and at the very early stage of development, when we had a pre-consultation, I advised the applicant that they should move forward with a heritage report to determine if this property actually has value. Because we noted during our previous recommendations on the Heritage Register, we noted that we thought this did have value. And they came back and their report said that it did not have value and it should be able to, they should be able to move forward with demolition. Upon reading the report, I referenced back our original evaluation and said, well, I understand that these things are somewhat subjective in terms of whether or not a property has value under Regulation 906. You said it doesn't. We said it does. So if you are going to say it doesn't, I have a few questions that I think are appropriate for follow-up. So the first one was, why does it not meet criterion 3.2, which is the one that we said it did meet? And they spent quite a lot of time in the original report talking about how this building really represents this historic Ontario farmstead typology. So if you're saying it is this unique type of expression in terms of farmland development, why isn't that enough to be considered heritage? So really wanted them to go back and provide a more in-depth reason to that. And the second question was about the construction date of the farmhouse, because this report was initially done during early stages in COVID, where they didn't have access to a lot of archival information. So a lot of information that's available through the Ontario government was off limits at the time the report was written. They also didn't have protocols in place to go inside of the house and actually look at the material of the house to help determine a date. So their report said that, well, before their report, I guess we had a date of 1890. And 1890 isn't a super old building. It's a quite an old building, but it's in line with a lot of the more rural properties throughout the town. Their report said that this could actually be an 1860 building that was just renovated in 1890. And my response to that was, if this is in fact an 1860 building, that puts us into an entirely different category. That's a pre-Confederation building that we have very few of. So I'm not satisfied in your report saying that this could be an 1860 building, but it doesn't have enough heritage value to be preserved. If you're going to make the case that it either is or isn't 1860, do that with more evidence and then come forward and we're in a position to make a decision on that. So with that information, they were told they had two options. They could either essentially revise the report and come back to us, or they could carry forward their report to their planning application, and then they could include this information in their final application. So essentially their choice was, do we want to address this now or do we want to address it later? And the fact that it was COVID and this wasn't moving forward made them say, now is a good time to address it. We really should go back while we have the time and figure out what we can about this building. So over the last year or so, they have been able to go back and do more research, and they have been able to go into the house and do some destructive testing to look at the materials used to actually construct it. And what they did determine is that this isn't an 1860 house. This isn't even an 1890 house. This is a 1908 house. And they were able to determine that, number one, by getting more clear information on the archival records. But more importantly than that, they were able to go in and actually open up the walls. And doing that allowed them to see a few things. Number one was the use of machine lath. So as soon as you start seeing lath that's been cut for that purpose rather than split lath, it puts it into a different era. There was also dimensional lumber used, which puts it sort of in that turn of the century era, and machine cut joists as well. So it became very clear that this building isn't nearly as old as they thought it may have been. And when you actually look at the building itself, there's really not much left. Like, this building has been entirely covered with it's either aluminum or vinyl siding. All of the windows have been replaced. So everything that you can see from the outside isn't of that much value. Well, with this report being done and them doing all the destructive testing, we realize that nothing inside is really of that much value either. And they were able to revise their report then to say that, you know, going back to my first question, saying, you said in your report that this was a great example of an Ontario farmstead. How come it's not? And they said, well, essentially one of the main component, if there's any one main component of the farmstead, it's the farmhouse. And what we're dealing with now isn't an 1860s house. It's a 1908 house that hasn't really retained any of its heritage character. So you don't have that full landscape that they originally thought they might have. And their eventual conclusion was that, you know, this is a very unremarkable example of the type. We have far better preserved examples of four-square buildings already. And in terms of these farmsteads, there are much better examples within the town. So this one, you know, there isn't really any necessity to preserving it. And, you know, from a professional opinion, I would agree with that. You know, I think we included this property on the list of non-designated heritage buildings because we didn't know everything about it. And we didn't want to keep this out of, you know, potentially conserved buildings if there was something of value there. What this report has really done is shone a light on what this building is, what the actual authentic features and fabric of it is. And the end conclusion is that, you know, as it says in the final point, this is somewhat unremarkable and not really deserving of preservation through the development as it moves forward. So with that said, you know, I think a motion would be appropriate that sort of follows the same path as what we've done for other properties that are non-designated properties that are on our heritage inventory. So this sample motion here is a replication of a motion that we made in the past for 522 Kingston Road, which is another building subject to redevelopment. And essentially what it says is that, you know, we recognize that this isn't an important heritage building. When the building is being demolished, we're not going to move forward with, you know, any attempt to designate this building. We have it now documented, and that's essentially the end of the road. So again, just a sample motion. If people don't agree with what's up here, by all means, you should move forward with something different. Another part that's important in this motion is just the fact that we're saying the report is received. So in our official plan, it says that whenever we have reports such as this moving forward, they need to be received by the Heritage Advisory Committee. So this is also just a way of documenting that we have received and reviewed the report.
Is there any questions or comments about this?
It's just Beverly again. I'm just sort of chuckling that, Mike, if you didn't make waves, we would have still had this house.
Well, oh yeah, yeah.
If it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Well, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah, it's one of those things where I think there are a lot of properties on our inventory that we don't know that much about. And as we learn more, we'll be put in the same position. Is it worth saving or is it not? And that's what it'll come down to.
Makes you wonder how many are on there where we say it's actually 40 years older than it is.
Yeah, we definitely, I mean, this did not look like an 1890s house to me, but I figured it was an 1890s house that maybe had been redone in the 1940s or something, right? So finding out that it's even more recent than that was kind of eye-opening. And I think you're right. I think that we will probably learn a lot about other properties as they go through similar processes in the future.
Any other questions or comments on this?
Yeah, it's Neil. Mike, do you believe this is going to be an extension of the cemetery or more townhouses?
No, this will be a residential development.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So I always struggle a little bit with these types of development applications because it is really hard to integrate some of these buildings into a new subdivision. However, it's not impossible. I mean, we're all well aware of what we did with the Westney House, and that type of approach is very much possible, and I think is very much worthwhile if the heritage building is deserving of that treatment, right? The West Glen House, that's an 1856 building. That's a very significant building with strong historical connections as well. This one doesn't really hit the mark on any of those. So, I mean, we could try to force it. I mean, there's always an opportunity to try to force it to be preserved and fit into a development. But in a case like that, I have no doubt that the applicant would appeal that. And if this went to a third party for, an unbiased review of whether or not this should be preserved, based on all the information we have access to, I have no doubt that they would determine it's not worthy of conservation. So it's one of those things where, I mean, I'm sure I, as much of any of you, like to see any historic building being preserved, but it's also a matter of knowing where to fight your battles. And if you really don't have any strong ground to stand on, these are the kinds of ones where in a sense, you have to concede because there's really not much worth battling for. Is
there any other comments? No. Well, would somebody like to put forth a motion?
Yeah, it's Neil. I will, to put the motion forward as written.
Any seconder?
I will second.
Thank you, Stephen. All in favor? Motion carried. Okay, and is there another one for us, Mike?
Oh, you betcha. There are a few more. And like I said, they get shorter, so I'll try to make them quite a bit quicker. This one here is a cultural heritage report for the Roslyn Road widening. I do have to apologize. I believe I may have had the wrong report circulated. I think I had the report from last year circulated. The new one, which should have been attached, is very, very similar. It just had a couple additional details. So I'll kind of walk you through what those details were. So Roslyn Road, as some of you may know, is they're looking at it for widening right now. And this is a project that essentially extends from Westney in the east, almost right to, well, beyond Lake Ridge Road, right into Whitby. And so very early on in this process, as part of this project, they were required to determine if there were any heritage resources in the area. And I informed them that yes, there were 3. So I marked them on this map here, and I'll show a photo of each individually in a moment. But there's one at 656 Roslyn Road, which is on the north side, and that is on our inventory of heritage properties, so it's not a designated property. There's one at 777 Audley Road North, again on our inventory, but not designated. And it's important to note that the resource of importance for this one is actually all the way down here. So it's, you know, quite a distance from Roslyn Road. And then the third one is one which we should all be familiar with based on some recent presentations, 762 Roslyn Road East, which is a designated heritage property. So 762 is actually this building, which, as we know from more recent meetings, they're considering or moving forward with an addition onto this property. So this is the one that's designated. This is the other one on Roslyn that's not designated, but is on our heritage inventory. And this right here is the one on Audley, which technically the property borders Roslyn Road, but it's actually quite a distance set back from the road. So what this study determined is, of these 3 properties, there will only be direct impacts to one property. And that is to the building featured here, the designated building, that's 762. And the direct impacts relate to old mature trees that are actually out at the front of this building, right at the front of the property line. Because of the widening, those may have to be removed. So what this report says is that we know there are direct impacts for 762 Roslyn. As a result of that, they need to do another heritage impact study specific to that property. So we will await that. When that's received, it'll come forward to the committee. The other 2 properties were said not to have any direct impacts. So they asked town staff if we'd be willing to waive the requirement for further study. And I did provide that, that approval for them. Because there are not any expected impacts on those other 2 properties, there won't be a specific study done for those. However, they are required to do vibration monitoring. And if there are any expected vibration impacts, then there will be a report coming forward. So at this point, this is somewhat of an interim report in that it's saying, we now know where the impacts lie. We'll provide another study that'll discuss those in more detail. So we'll just have to await those. Given that it is a heritage report, though, it is appropriate for us to make a motion just to say that this report has been received. And what I will do is I can issue a copy of the actual new updated report to the committee rather than the one I mistakenly had attached to you before the meeting.
I got a question for you, Mike.
Sure.
What will the road grade be? Will it change? Will it be elevated?
It's a good question. I'm not entirely sure. I don't think it varies much from what's there now. I think it may be elevated slightly because you're
Because that's,
going. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
that's been a problem that the town has caused it with, like, my property. They've lifted the road 3 feet higher than what it was in the 50s,
Okay.
which caused problems on Church Street, etc. I think that has to be considered because of the stone foundations, the driveways, etc., in these properties.
So when you mentioned some of the issues, is that relating to like drainage and water infiltration or something?
And entrance to the property, etc. Like if they raise the road 2 feet, now this home has a driveway going down into their front yard.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, one of the big differences between the context of your home and these homes is this is very much a rural setting. So the houses are set back, much further from the street than yours is. And so where there is a change in grade, it can kind of be leveled over a greater distance and you don't see the same scale of impacts. But those are important considerations to be made. And I think they are absolutely something that's being considered by the engineering team when they put forward the final recommendations. At this point, we don't have a final design. I would imagine that the road will be elevated slightly because there are going to be more lanes to the road. So that would tell me if you want to maintain those historic drainage patterns, then the sort of apex, the center of the road is going to have to be higher than it is now because you're going to get, a wider slope in terms of the drainage on both sides. But I think I can look into that more closely when they do the final design and try to bring some more details back to the committee on that.
Is there any other questions or comments about this? Do we have somebody that wants to do the sample motion? I think that a lot of people have locked up here, Sarah.
I can still see everyone, Mr. Chair, so perhaps.
Yes, but I'm looking at Mike and Stephen and Jeff. There's no movement there. And I'm just wondering if they can still hear us.
Yep, there's movement
yes,
on my
yes.
end, so it could be a connection issue temporarily, but I can certainly assist if you'd like to call the motion.
Okay, would somebody like to put forth this motion?
Okay, first, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, let it be moved that the Cultural Heritage Report, existing conditions and preliminary impact assessment prepared by ASI in relation to the widening of Rawson Road be received.
Is there a seconder? Thank you.
Good, and a show of
All
hands.
in favor?
Passed unanimous, Bruce.
Good, excellent. I guess I'm the one that's locking up here. Are we ready to go to the next one, Mike?
We are. So again, another quick one. So probably over the next few meetings, I'll continue to bring updates forward on Elizabeth Street Cemetery. I provided an update, I believe, in June on the property, saying that bylaw had actually gone out and issued a notice all the way back in December, saying that the property owners were required to bring this property into compliance with the heritage designation and property standards. And that was to be done by, I believe it was July 1st, 2021. The property owner came forward and has provided evidence now that they are working with 2 different cemetery restoration companies in the attempt to get this work done. And neither one of those companies is available to do the work in 2021. So they've asked for an extension to 2022, which staff deem to be appropriate. We really can't force their hand if there's nobody available to do the work. However, that said, there are some issues, some of the fallen monuments and some of the ones that are leaning heavily, where there are sort of remedial work that can be done on an interim basis, just to ensure that these monuments are safeguarded over the winter. So it looks like that's the way this will proceed. There'll be some minimal work being done just to stabilize this for the winter, but then the bulk of the work will actually happen in summer 2022 or 2022, and that will be supported through, or at least there's plans to support that through a town grant. So beyond that component of the project, I know in the past we've discussed dumping on the ravine edge. So this is something that we had a student actually over the summer, and I'd hoped to bring her into the fold in terms of putting something together for local residents to inform them and remind them that they're not to be dumping on the edge of the ravine, and to provide some information for them on, you know, how detrimental doing that can actually be to the health of the ravine slope. So in preparing this, so as I mentioned, the student wasn't able to get to this work. So I put something together just a couple of weeks ago for the committee to look at. And when I went out to the site to take a few photos, I mean, it was very visible that historically people have been dumping on this property. But the more alarming thing was that, you know, this brush had been probably put there within the last couple of days, and I was out on site on August 24th, so very recently. So it's abundantly clear that people aren't getting the message, that some people are continuously dumping here. So the idea moving forward is that we put together a flyer. We provide that to all of the local households surrounding this area, so that they are aware of, number one, the fact that what they're doing is illegal, and number two, they're more informed on the impacts that it's having. So I believe this was circulated as a component of the agenda, just very sort of high level overview as to why, as I mentioned, why they shouldn't be dumping on the edge, the impacts that that can have on sort of aggravating the erosion of the slope, and, you know, just providing more information about what they can do alternatively. The town has, all of Durham has this program in place where yard waste is picked up continuously throughout the year. So really, it's not like there's no opportunity for them to be doing something different. There's no reason at this point for anyone to be dumping on this ravine slope. So did anyone have any comments on that, or was there any information that anybody thought should be added? If nothing, then we'll move forward with that. I'll work with our communications team to get this put together in a more visual format, get some of those photos in there, and we'll get that out to residents very soon.
Good.
So quick update on the West Glen plaque. This is something we spoke about, I believe, during the summer break as well. The hopes were that we could have a plaque unveiling this year on this small parquet block just north of the Westney House. We have the plaque. The plaque has been cast and is in our possession. However, the park component still hasn't been built. So this is on the books for this summer. I believe the project will be moving forward in a matter of months, if not weeks. But at this point, we're not quite in the position to do the plaque unveiling. So I'll keep the committee updated. Ideally, the work of installing the trees and the landscaping elements will be done sooner rather than later, because it would be nice to unveil this plaque this year. If not, we'll probably have to wait until springtime next year and move forward with that event. Any questions?
That's great news. That's great news.
Yeah.
Any questions on this? I guess not. We're ready to move forward, Mike.
All right. So the next one was just really a little bit of information. Something very interesting came out of Clarington recently. And, you know, we've been seeing this right across the province, this situation where people own heritage properties and they're being told that they can't get insurance, or they're being given rates that are just absolutely absurd. And the reality is that heritage designation should have nothing to do with insurance rates. Your insurance is based on the material fabric of your house. If you have an old house that has old wiring, your insurance rates are likely going to be higher, but that's not because it's designated. That's going to be the case whether or not it's designated. It's because it's an old house. Yet we're seeing lots of insurance providers try to sort of wiggle their way out of in terms of providing appropriate insurance, and nobody's quite sure why. And this really shouldn't be happening. So because this has happened recently in Clarington, I thought it was, quite an impressive thing and quite a good thing that they've moved forward with this resolution of council. And I'll just read it very quickly. It says, now therefore be it resolved that the municipality of Clarington requests the Minister of Heritage, Tourism, Sport and Cultural Industries to engage in meaningful dialogue with the Minister of Finance and the Insurance Bureau of Canada to initiate a review to address and ensure alignment between the requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act, the regulations governing insurance providers, and the policies and practices thereof in order to better support rather than penalize owners of designated heritage properties who act as stewards of the province's significant cultural heritage resources throughout communities across Ontario, and that as part of the province's actions to address this matter, municipal heritage committees be invited to engage as stakeholders, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Honourable Doug Ford, Premier of Ontario, Lindsay Park, MPP, David Piscini, MPP, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. So nothing really for us to act on, but this was one of those sort of good news items where it made me quite happy to see another municipality taking action, because this is clearly something that's affecting heritage properties in their area. All right.
Michael,
Yes.
that'd be good news for the lady that bought Westney House. She said she had a lot of problems getting insurance for that house, even though it's all brand new inside.
Yeah, that one's particularly scary because, like you said, that's essentially a new house within, a heritage design. Even with some of the heritage features, like the cladding itself has been entirely replaced with modern materials. So the fact that some insurance providers are saying they can't provide insurance, or they're charging these crazy rates, is something that really does need to be addressed. So yeah, I think a lot of people will benefit from some action from this if we see anything come forward. And I'll keep an eye on this, and I'll provide updates to the committee as it moves forward. So the last item, and I don't have much in the way of updates on this, but I just wanted to mention, for those that weren't aware, the first heritage video that the team has put together has now been branded with the sort of town identity and the Heritage Committee identity, and it's been put out on the town's social media feed. In addition to that, Pam messaged me asking what could be done with these videos beyond getting them on our social media outlets. Was there any opportunity to have them shared at the St. Francis Center, for example, prior to any performances happening there? So I did reach out to Robert Gruber, who I think many are familiar with, who's in the recreation department, and he has said absolutely, that would be something fantastic to do. So just another channel for us to share the great work that you guys are doing. So as these things continue to be wrapped up and we get the final branding on them, we'll have a place to show them. So I think that's great news.
Question, Mike?
Yep.
Is there any way that we can maybe get some of these shown on, say, the Rogers 10 channel? You know how they do the local council report or council meetings and so on? Is there not a little vignette thing that we could ask them to deal with?
Perhaps.
That gets it out farther than Ajax.
Yeah, so that's something I'll talk with our communications team and see if they have any kind of information on, the sort of process we need to follow in order to look into that. If there's anyone on the committee that knows anything about that and wants to do a little online research as well, that could be helpful too.
Any other comments or anything on this?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Very quickly, positive development. We now have some good guidelines as to what the town wants in terms of producing these videos, and it's a great tool, and they're kind of fun to put together. So we do have a third topic. The Old Post Inn is probably our next one that's going to come down the pipe. And thanks for all the help stick handling this past staff. And it would be nice if it did go to Rogers, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Thank you.
Mike, is there any other business?
That is it from me.
Thank you, Mike. Councillor Klang, is there anything from to share with the committee at this time?
Sure. All about flags. Today, Ajax Council recognized National Hunger Action Month with a special flag raising at Town Hall with Feed the Need Durham. So they have asked to have this month of September be noted as National Hunger Action Month, and we raised their flag in front of Town Hall. So you'll see the flag flying in for a bit. Another thing about flag, we have 3 flagpoles existing right now in front of Town Hall. We've ordered a 4th one, and this one will be flying the Indigenous flag, the First Nations flag, permanently in front of the Town Hall of Ajax. So my report is all about flags this September, and that's my short report. Thank you for allowing me to share this with you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other business?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Sarah speaking. I have one briefly for you. There was a link included in the agenda package regarding an upcoming opportunity of interest that Mike and I thought could be of benefit to this group here. The Ontario Business Improvement Association is hosting a joint workshop webinar virtual conference, mini conference, if you will, on Wednesday, October 20th from 12 to 5 p.m. And it's all about that intersectionality between accessibility and heritage, which I know is something that this group has mentioned interest in before, and potentially exploring that locally with our AAC at a later date. So this is a great opportunity to kind of participate and learn some more information about how those two portfolios overlap and complement each other. And we do have availability for members to attend within our education budget. So if anybody is available and would like to register for the event, I would kindly ask them to shoot me an email and I will process the registration for you.
Thank you, Sarah. I just have one little thing of interest to share. Former committee member Daryl has a heritage home in Pickering Village that was just sold. But right before he sold the home, he put the most beautiful front door, in mahogany custom-made front door in the house, but the front door actually faces south because that's the way the house was built, and it doesn't face the street. So if you're ever on Linton, you should take a look at the beautiful mahogany front door system. It's just incredible. Any other business?
Yeah, it's Neil, I've got one. Mike, a couple of 3 meetings ago, we talked about a missing plaque at the John A. Murray Park commemorating the old schoolhouse on Pickering Beach Road. Do you have any information on whether that was ever put back again?
I don't know if it was put back. I do know that we do, our operations has it in their possession. I don't remember exactly why it didn't go back immediately. I think it was something along the lines of like they couldn't fasten it to the rock the same way. I can follow up and see if there's any plans to put it back anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the plaque. It should be there and not stuck in a warehouse somewhere. So, you know,
Yeah.
it has to get a proper answer from them, if you wouldn't mind, Mike.
Sure.
Any other business?
Mr. Chair, Sarah again, just one quick one. To put it there as a placeholder, we have booked the committee's annual report to council for the November 22nd council meeting. So I wanted to provide fair warning because I know this group does an excellent job in putting together a presentation. If you're looking to go the route of your slideshow or a written report, all of those options are available to you and to give you as much notice as we can. So that would be a 7 p.m. virtual setting, just as we have here this evening for our annual report to council.
That sounds like a lot of fun. That's great. Any other, I enjoyed doing it the once I got involved. Is there any other business or anything to talk about? No? Okay. That concludes our meeting. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Nobody wants to go.
Thanks, Jeff. A seconder?
Also.
Thanks, Stephen. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, October 6th. And at this time, it's scheduled as electronic meeting. Thank you very much for the great meeting.
Good job.